Okay, so we've made it this far in terms of the framework. Should be all good to go. Might be a couple modifications we make here at the end in terms of the URL and how we set that up, but we'll see how that goes when we actually get to that point. But yeah, so now let's start actually building out our API tests. And to do that, I like to have my tests actually living within the application that's going to be tested. So it makes it a little easier, like when you're developing a pipeline, you have your tests and all that stuff associated with it, and the framework is completely separate from it. So the idea would be that in your pipeline, you would clone your framework, the API testing framework that we have here, into that VM or server or whatever you're doing, and then you would run the test executions of your test folder that you're going to have on that application. So it makes it completely universal and really, really easy, and you can get that report after from the reports folder. But so let's go ahead and actually switch over to my demo API here that I have. So what I'm going to do here, I'm going to create a brand new folder. I call it tests. And in this folder, I'm going to have two things here. You can structure this however you want. You can do whatever you want with this. This is just typically how I do this. So I'm going to do API underscore tests. Oops. That needs to be a folder. There we go. So with that, we have our API underscore tests. And then I'm also going to create another folder, and it's going to be my data folder. And so the idea here is that we keep our data, like, so for example, say you have some post calls, put calls, delete calls, or whatever you're doing, and it's a JSON payload, right? Or even XML if you're going that route, which then you'd have to modify some other things. But you could keep that in this data folder and then reference that to your API tests to keep those separate and clean. So in my case, this API is rather simple. I mean, it's got some complexity to it, but in terms of testing and validation, there isn't much that I need except to make sure that the endpoint is up and running, that the health check of the server is good, and all that stuff. So the first test I'm going to make here is actually going to be a health check. This API has, let me double check here. Where am I going? Source. Routes and then service. Yeah. So I do have a health check here. So I'm going to automate this. I want to make sure my health check is up and running, which is, giving back the health of the server. So let's go ahead and automate this. Let's go ahead and create a, oh, I already had another test here. This is a different kind of test. This is for validating other stuff. That could get confusing, but this is separate. So maybe I'll just call this, how about this? We'll do API tests. Yeah, that's better. Okay, so let's create a new file, and we'll call this test, like our, if you remember here, hold on, it is this one, PyTest INI. Oh, I did just open up the wrong one. Yeah, this one. The PyTest INI we're looking for test underscore anything you want, .py, test underscore anything you want. So let's go ahead and keep that same convention here. So we've got test underscore, let's just call this health test .py. So we've got our test file all set up and ready to go here. This one will not have any data to it since it's just a get call, but let's go ahead and automate this. All right, so let's go ahead and do this. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to import PyTest. This is going to give us access to our PyTest global variables. You can see that it's going to give us a squiggly line because I don't have a virtual environment, but it shouldn't matter because we're going to be running from our other framework anyways. So it's going to look a little bit wrong here for a little bit. But so we have import PyTest, we have import requests. And there's two things that I'm going to do here. So since I have a test and a production environment, I want to also associate my tests with non-prod and prod, basically. So what I'm going to do is the health check, I can run this either in my production environment or my test environment. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to mark this function that I'm about to create with non-prod. So you can do that with this. And I'm going to do it with prod. And so basically these are setting up two flags that I'm going to be able to run here when I actually run my framework is with the PyTest is, do I want to run non-prod tests or do I want to run prod tests? Like say, for example, you have your production database you want to keep clean. So you want to run all of your heavy data insertion tests on test, but you don't want to run them on prod. That is the purpose of this here. So this allows it to have both production and non-production running capabilities. So let's call this def_test, like our naming convention from our PyTest and INI, health check. Yeah, that's fine. So let's actually make a minor change here. Just keep in my mind, this should work. We're going to test this out to make sure it does work. But what we're going to do is, if you recall from our framework, where we did this request.url lib3 to .disable warnings, we're going to move that to our conf test. We're going to put that in here. Import request, I already had there on accident. But we import request, put it here, and I'm hoping, fingers crossed, that this would just count for the entire execution of the application run. Otherwise, if not, we're going to have to put this in literally every file. So we're going to give that a shot, and hopefully it works. So we have that. So next thing we're going to do here is we're going to get our URL. So in this case, it would be URL equals an f string, and we're going to gather our pytest.env. If you remember from here, pytest.env, which is our configuration. And then from that env, we're actually just going to grab this, copy this exactly, our base URL. So let's do that. And here's a little Python quirk here. So let's go ahead and actually switch this to double quotes. And now this is happy. So we have our base URL. And then what we need to do now is append the URL endpoint. So in this case, I believe it is service. Okay, so /service, and then it's going to be health. Just so I have it right this time. So it's going to be /service. Double check. It is service. And then it's going to be /health. And so what we're going to do now is just like with our post call that we did before, we're going to do a request here, but instead of post, it's going to be a get call. So we'll just call this request, do that same little backslash thing for allowing us to go to the next line. It's going to be request.get, our URL. We're going to set the verify to false. Our headers will be a little bit different. So if you recall from our auth token, our content type, we can pass that in here. So I'm just going to copy and paste that. It's on my other screen. And then one more field that I have in mind is an auth token is required here. So you have to have an authorization token for this health check. So let's go ahead and add that here. So that's going to be pytest.auth token. And so that should be it for our headers. And since this is a get call, we don't have a body. So all we're going to do here, this is a super simple test. This is just a health check. We're going to do request dot okay. Request, sorry. So yeah, that is our first test. All done, set up. Switching back over real quick, I am making a couple of changes here. I'm renaming this back to tests, and I'm going to keep this as test health check, and then I'm going to name the method as test health check. I'm going to reduce these to lower cases just to be more consistent. API test. Yeah, right, I need to fix that. And then I'm going to rename this to data. So let me pause and bring that back real quick. So I think with these changes, we can call this video good for now. It's kind of getting long. We'll actually go test this stuff in the next video. Before that, actually, in case I do need to make some changes, I'm going to actually look up the documentation for this and see if Python 3.10 actually allows that conf test way of injecting the method. So I'm going to give that a shot, and if it works, I'm going to refactor some stuff before the test video that I create for this. So just a heads up, but I'll go ahead and see you in the next one.